If you're someone who'd like to see the conversation on sex and gender go much deeper than usual, then you will get a lot out of this episode because it has views that are often not shared in public and maybe even are rarely talked about at all. And some of the controversial topics discussed in a meaningful way here are how sex binary is not of the patriarchy. It is the organic way of nature. It is nature's implicit intelligence. And how sex and gender are inherently different things. They are not the same, and they are not both on a spectrum. And that gender is and has always been fluid. However, sex, it just is. And that is beyond ideology and even preference. And in this conversation, Luis, Mojica, and I, where we really align as somatic practitioners is in reference to nature and to the body's natural wisdom. And I feel that if we disconnect from nature based on ideology, then we're disconnecting from organic reality itself. And that causes a lot of preventable problems. And one of the things Luis said, he said many fantastic things that I appreciate so much. But one of them is how colonialist thinking is being enforced through removing private spaces for women and girls by using a domination model, which is inherently patriarchal in its approach. And something important to know about Luis is that he was born intersex, which gives him a highly unique perception of men, of women, and of gender, because he is biologically designed to deeply understand the consciousness of both male and female, since he naturally embodies both. And I genuinely believe this episode is contributing some really important, deeper nuances that are underneath the usual dialogues. And I was so into this conversation and feeling connected with my new friend here that I regretfully forgot to highlight his work at the end of the episode. And I can't believe I did that. So if you don't already know about Luis Mojica, he is a prominent teacher in somatic education, and he's got a thriving community of thousands of people around the world, helping them to recover from stress and trauma. And he uses whole food self-inquiry and somatic experiencing as tools to find safety within. His company called Holistic Life Navigation is where he offers multiple offline and online ways to learn and stay connected with him, as well as his own weekly podcast and a popular YouTube channel filled with many insights and interviews. So, if you don't already follow Luis, I highly recommend it if you're into somatic wisdom. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, I'd be so grateful if you could share it with those that are going to benefit from listening to this. Welcome to this provocative and heartfelt podcast where patriarchy is defined as a paradigm that both men and women uphold in different ways. Here you get to listen in on genuine conversations between leaders from around the world to discover more mutual respect and less division, as well as more pleasure and love in your life. My name is Dévashi Shakti, and you are warmly welcome to be part of these beyond patriarchal sex conversations. All right. Louise, I'm so happy that we can meet in conversation for the first time today. And
Me too.
like I was saying, I'm especially grateful that you're willing to do this at a time when you're currently promoting a different aspect of your work with nutrition. So you are a somatic therapist and nutritionist, or you work
Mhm.
in the area of
Yep.
somatic nutrition, which is a really
Yeah, I
interesting
do
field.
both. Yeah,
Both.
I kind of that my work is the intersection of both. That's what the book Food Therapy is about. Those two things. It's very unique. So I'm trying to kind of pioneer this new way of seeing food.
Yes, yes. And like I mentioned, a woman in my community really follows everything that you're sharing online. And and I have as well over the years from time to time. And I'm a little aware of your background, and I'd love for you to share more about that. But I know that you have a very unique perception on this subject, and the subject that I've invited you to speak with me on is around the necessity for women and girls to have private and safe spaces. And in Australia currently, there is a lot of talk about this in the media over it's known as the Grover versus Tickle case. And yeah, so trans women are currently being prioritized over women and girls in order to, everyone try to be inclusive. But what this has done, in my opinion, is through that compassion and empathy turned out, but not in, which is such the basis of the women's work that I teach, actually, to learn how to apply that to ourselves. With this overdoing of the empathy externally, in my opinion, it's erased women, biological women, where they can't even define that term anymore. And so at the time of recording this in June 2026, it's currently not possible or even legal to have women's only spaces without being potentially under scrutiny or, a legal case for discrimination.
Mm.
And I would really appreciate your voice coming into the mix here, because I know that your perspective is so unique.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that my first piece, kind of the simplicity of my perspective, is I had this experience where I was just learning all this was happening in 2018. This shift into these different ideologies around gender and biological sex. And I'd like to say that I live under a rock. I live in like this beautiful, timeless world up until very recently. The more public my work has gotten, I've been exposed to so many current
Mm,
events and ideas and interacting with all the different people. But prior to 2018, I didn't really know what was brewing in society around gender theory and queer theory, which essentially erases biological sex and replaces it with gender. And that to me is the real
yes.
piece of what, when people say, what changed? What changed in public? That's what changed. Because prior to 2013, even, and I'm speaking as an American, I'm not sure other places, but in America before 2013, you could ask a transsexual, you could ask a queer, you could ask a gay person, a straight, if you asked anybody, is gender and sex the same thing, you would get a no. And then
Mm,
somewhere between 2013 and 2018, it turned into gender and sex are on a spectrum. Gender and
mm,
sex are the same thing. And then it turned into gender is essentially sex. There is no such thing as biological sex. Now, the reason why I had this kind of deep no about that is on so many levels. One level is as a somatic therapist, I am obsessed and devoted to the body and not through even a scientific lens, but through an ancestral lens, through an indigenous heart, of the lineage that the male and female carries on through the bloodline, and the beautiful medicine that the male and female body bring, like the way the binary comes together to create friction and
mm,
fertility and life, right? Like you need the binary for life. So when I was hearing these ideas and even underlining ideas that the body was something you could impress an idea onto, like if I identify as male, or if I identify as female, or if I identify as non-binary, I am that thing, to me was ironically colonial. And in America, there's this kind of movement within these I call them neo queer spaces because old school queer spaces didn't think this way. But this very modern queer theory, which is rooted in old queer theory, which I won't even get into, but this modern movement is really about impressing idea, mind over matter, body, which is inherently colonial because it's the same difference as chopping up pieces of land and saying you own it. So it was
mm,
interesting that the same sect of people that were really into decolonizing as a political movement and really against kind of settler colonialism and kind of late white European American colonialism we're now saying, well, my body is something I can say what it is, and everyone has to agree with me. I thought this something's dissonant here. I can't get with
Yeah.
this. And
Yeah.
so there was that piece as the somatic therapist and just lover of the body that
Mm.
felt like this doesn't feel like it's in relationship with the body. This almost feels like in dominance over the body.
Yes. Louise, I want to
I'll
say
pause
something about
there.
this
Yeah.
too, because, oh gosh, I have dear, dear, dear sisters of mine, sisters of my heart and soul who, have been fiercely advocating for women since forever. And
Mm.
I was so shocked and alarmed to see that some of them abandoned their post, so to speak, in wanting to be so inclusive to the point of erasing women. And I found this literally shocking for my nervous system to process. And I was seeing, and I was gratefully able to meet some of these women in conversation where we could put our friendship first and me not be cancelled by them, which was
Hmm.
something I was really grateful for at the time since that was happening elsewhere. But the way that they were describing it was that it's patriarchal to fix people into the binary. Whereas my perception is more in alignment with yours, and it's from this deep reverence that I have for the primordial intelligence of the soma. And all the work that I do is based on that reverence and deep respect for the primordial divine reality.
Yes.
And that's such a different way of looking at it. And so I love to bring these conversations on this podcast to look at things from different angles and open up a wider lens and see what's possible from there.
I mean, I'm so touched by that. Like, I feel that in my heart, that primordial piece. Because when I think of patriarchy, when I think of matriarchy, to me, the traditional matriarch is so empowering of a female's discernment for boundaries. It's actually not about inclusion. If
Mm,
you look into the animal kingdom, if you look into mating rituals amongst humans, even in tribes, even present day modern societies, women's bodies are designed to be highly discerning sexually with a male partner. They're not
yes,
meant to be inclusive. It would be detrimental to the life of and health of the female body to be inclusive,
yes,
right?
that's
It's right. You're designed to be exclusive, and my wife always calls it that women are the gatekeepers of their society, that they decide what DNA goes on, which
right.
bloodline comes through. They literally ask men have to prove themselves to enter the gate of a woman's body. And again, we see this in almost every species of animal. So I think what you're saying is so important. It's like more patriarchal to me that women lose their ability to be discerning and have boundaries and be exclusive for this idea of be inclusive when someone says that you should be. To me, that's actually a neo-patriarchy that I think is fascinating that's
Yeah.
emerging with this.
Yes, the coercive element is what I pick up on of the I must agree with what someone else chooses to assert for themselves. And how I feel is, well, you're free to do as you please, but you cannot impose your reality onto me and you know, um, my own primal intelligence as a
Yes.
female human animal. What I see is what I see. You cannot change my um, primary instinctive, intuitive knowing. Like that is against nature to me.
That's right. That what you just said right there, that's what makes it inherently colonial. If you're
Mm,
going off this idea of colonization, which all cultures do, it's not just white Europeans, it's been historical all over the world. But what it really comes down to, the way one of my teachers taught this to me, is it comes down to, are you in relationship? Are you in domination? And when you say what you just said, this isn't a relational lens. This is a dominant lens. I'm going to dominate you if you don't agree with me. That is the last, that's so not matriarchal and is so not decolonial. So it is patriarchal, it is highly colonial, and it's oppressive and dominating. And
yes.
I don't know if you want me to go into my childhood, my
Yes, please
background,
do.
to give
Please do.
people some
That's so
context.
important. Yeah.
Yeah, and it is. It's one of the reasons I feel so passionate about this is because of my personal experience. So I was born with what's called an intersex condition, and intersex conditions affect people all over the world, but a very small amount of people. It's not a common thing. And there's kind of three ways they express themselves, and these essentially are sex ambiguity, biological sex ambiguity. So one way is it can affect your genitals. So you can have testes, but a vagina, for example. Another way is it can affect your hormones. So you are male, but you produce an excess of female hormones. Another way is your chromosomes. And so some people have all three, some people have one or two. I have the second, I have the hormonal intersex expression, where my body transforms testosterone into estrogen. So when I was born with a really high amount of estrogen, which sometimes happens with boys and it goes away after a couple days. It's usually from their mother's womb. Mine just kept increasing throughout childhood. And by the time I went into the fifth grade, I started growing breasts and I started growing hips. And I felt extremely female. You know, I was highly dysphoric. So I lived the trans person's experience of sex dysphoria. My body didn't make sense. I would look in a mirror, I would feel disgusted, confused, betrayed. I just kept going in what felt like the wrong direction. It was like
Mm.
this male and female puberty happening at once. And after, sixth or seventh grade, when people started realizing that I had this different body, I started gaining really negative attention. I was sexually assaulted on several accounts. I was molested many times, and I started objectifying and hating myself. So I
Oh.
went through years of crippling dysphoria and dysmorphia because I couldn't rely on my own eyes anymore. It was so distorted how I saw myself. And it wasn't until I was 23 when I met my now wife, she was my girlfriend at the time, when I realized I had such sexual trauma and such issues with having sex because my body was always covered. I would bind, I would wear four different t-shirts and sweaters and vests. I was hiding that I had breasts. I just didn't tell people because I didn't know what this was. Doctors didn't know at the time. And so I was relying on just my male genitals because I have normal male genitals. So it was like that felt very secure. Everything else felt insecure. And my relationship was about to fail because I couldn't be naked with my partner. I couldn't take my clothing off. It was so shaming. And I
Wow.
told her what my body was like. She was the first person I ever told in my whole life. She supported me to get top surgery. I went to a surgeon. I got my breast removed. And that started this process of invoking my masculinity, at age 23. So I had 10 years of crippling dysphoria. Then I had top surgery. And then a couple years into that, I realized the dysphoria and the dysmorphia didn't go away. Like I appeared average male to the average person who didn't know my history, but I was still living with all the shame and pain and sexual trauma. So we can go where we want with that, but I just want to give that context to your listeners that I've lived the sex dysphoric experience. I've lived the gender affirming treatment experience. Like I get it. And I still disagree with what's happening in a lot of cultures right now around this.
Yes, this is specifically why your voice here is so important. And thank you for having the courage to share your personal story, really.
Thanks for
Mm.
listening.
Yeah. And so you intimately know from your own felt sense experience what that dysmorphia and discrimination and all of these distortions that come from being judged from other people and such. And
Yeah.
it's actually very, very fascinating to me that nature creates this. I
hmm
don't think I like that it's called a condition,
I
actually.
know I don't usually I call it an expression.
Okay, yeah, but that's what the medical system says, right?
Yeah, it's like the intersex condition.
Wow. Wow. Because this is one of the things that people have tried to, convince me differently than how I see things is because of the two-spirit indigenous perspective. And Luis, you actually are that from what I'm understanding.
Yes, and I've grown really tired of seeing my experience be used in political conversations. because a lot of people, a lot of people will use intersex people as proof that there's a spectrum of sex. And that's true for intersex people, but that's
Yes,
not true for the average person.
that's
So,
right.
right? So there's been this, and I talk about this piece a lot. There's been a really interesting, a true appropriation of the intersex experience with
Mm,
average everyday people who want to be queer or want to be non-binary or say they're trans or dysphoric. And they even use terms that, again, were used in advocacy for intersex children because a lot of children who are born intersex, like I was, the doctors don't know about it. They're not trained in it. It's such a rare case. And in some cultures, it's super taboo that some kids are even put on medication. Some kids are even surgically manipulated within the first year of life so they can be raised as one sex over the other, even though they're ambiguous.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
to try to reduce that injustice to them, this term was created assigned male at birth or assigned female at birth. And
Oh.
that term has been appropriated by the average ally who wants to say, I'm biologically female, but I identify as male. I was assigned female at birth is the word. I have such a problem with this term because one, when every person who is an intersex is saying I'm assigned female at birth, you're giving such power to human doctors and medical industries to actually say they can assign sex, which obliterates nature. Forget about
Yeah.
sex. Like nature's
Yes.
off the table. And this is where it feels very patriarchal and colonial, anti-nature.
Mm.
But you also appropriate the intersex experience because you are not assigned female at birth. You were born female, and maybe you are totally dysphoric, and maybe as an adult you choose to transition and live as a man. That's fine. But you're still born female. No one assigned you that. The only people assigned a sex at birth are truly intersex people.
Mm. Oh my gosh. I feel like I haven't even gone deeply into that feeling and understanding enough myself. So not only are women and girls being marginalized in this whole uh, process that's happening socially, but it kind of erases the importance and significance of your experience as an intersex person as well.
Yeah, it does. I've had trans people say to me, with kindness and even apologetically, they've said to me, I've pretended to be intersex to make people think that I was allowed to transition.
Oh,
And because they're looking for validation, and I feel them. I get chills when I say it to you. I feel it in my heart. I know that feeling. You can't understand until you have felt the feeling of truly not thinking you belong to a certain sex category. It's one of the most dehumanizing experiences you can imagine because
yeah.
being male or female is so ancestral and it's such an integral part of society. When you don't believe you're either one or you believe you're the wrong one, it is so painful. And
Mm.
so I have so much empathy and love and I've supported so many transsexuals through my career and as I have dear friends that are transsexuals. And again, there was always before recently, there was always an understanding that my biological sex is still female. Even if I appear male, even if I'm on testosterone, even if I'm transitioning to live as a male, my biology is female. Even if I'm appearing as a woman, dressing as a woman, taking estrogen, my biology is male. So every transsexual I ever knew always knew that. But somewhere we blurred the line. We used the intersex experience and we
Mm.
used ideology to say biological sex is a spectrum. You can choose your sex. You cannot choose your sex. I'm sorry. It chooses
Mm.
you. Even my
Mm.
intersex, it chose me.
That's right. That's right. And the organic nature of that makes it truly so fascinating that nature decided that this is, you know, um, yeah, this is the experience that you are to have. And I don't know if this is comfortable for you to share about, so feel free to let me know.
I'm an open book.
If it weren't for the perceptions and judgment and discrimination coming at you from other people, if that weren't there, would that have changed your relationship to your intersex nature?
Oh, yeah. I think about this all the time. I don't think about it anymore all the time, but for years, I mean, every day of my life after I had my surgery, I would think about that.
Yeah.
Because what I was really confronted with from having my surgery was misogyny, internalized misogyny. Like I had to get rid of my breasts. Like this female aspect of me was
Mm.
just disgusting, right?
Wow.
And I was obliterated because of that. It wasn't my maleness that got me, sexually assaulted and bullied and harassed. It was my femaleness. And
Mm.
so part of being born intersex, I think, was the pain, but the gift of experiencing misogyny as a man, like getting not fully, of course, I don't have the female experience, but I have a taste of it, right? And so I do believe if I lived in a society that was matriarchal and really loved the female, and we can get into this at some point, really understood gender nonconformity separate from sex, I
Yes.
think I could have loved my breasts. I think I could have went swimming with my shirt off. I think I could have avoided being raped. I think there's so many things that could have happened because I wouldn't have had so much shame. And I
Yeah.
think about that a lot, and I speak to my transsexual friends about that. And some of them are able to say, yeah, I would have never transitioned if I could have just been a really masculine woman. That is a thing a lot of people are talking about behind closed doors.
Yeah, th this feels like a really important thing for people to be talking about a little more, you
Hmm.
know, because in the experience of children transitioning their gender through the yeah pharmaceutical medicine and surgery route, and is it really that they need to do that for in themselves, or is it the perceptions of the culture that
Yeah,
really could be changing, to not to
absolutely.
internalize it that much?
I mean, I really think that's what we're actually not talking about. I think what we're doing with the whole movement, the transgender movement of gender affirming care, especially for kids, which I'm highly opposed to. I think what we're really doing is we're treating a symptom that
Yes.
comes from a society that's actually really binary with gender. And
Mm.
even when you said gender transitioning, I would even correct that to sex transitioning. Like the
Yes,
issue
thank
is
you.
yeah, of course, the issue is the words have been switched.
Yes.
A transgender person, that's Amelia Earhart. That's Patti
Mhm.
Smith. That's like the first female prime minister. Like that's what a transgender looks like, is someone that transcends a gender norm. It has nothing to do with biology or sex. Whereas
Mhm.
a transsexual is someone that literally changes their biology with surgery and hormones to appear, live, feel like the opposite sex. They're two different things.
Yeah.
And transsexual has actually been turned into a slur in America. If you say transsexual, that's a very negative word to use. You're supposed to say transgender or trans.
Well,
Because if you have these definitions, you realize that we're kind of a bit, I, I want to say the word brainwashed, and I don't know if that's even proper because I never know how intentional things are. But we're conditioned now to see gender and sex as the same thing. But a kid that has gender dysphoria, every child going through puberty will almost have gender dysphoria. Every child.
yes,
Because
that's good.
right? And some sex dysphoria too, because something's transforming in their body. So we've taken this natural initiation of dysphoria, as I see it, this normal rite of passage of wow, this body feels weird, and we've medicalized it. And that's why I have a real issue. And this is where I first spoke out as well a few years ago. When it came to kids, I never cared about adults. I'm like, do your thing. But when it came to down to kids, I was like, no way. Kids are supposed to be dysphoric during puberty. You have to wait it out.
Yes. Yes, I 1000% agree. In fact, I perceive it as child abuse to allow it to go on the way that it has. And, to not presence that they're meant to be questioning and feeling awkward, or, it's just part of the process, part of the rite of passage.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
but to be going through that as a young one, it's like we are encountering all of the subtle and overt messages and distortions in the field of the culture, and misogyny being a huge part of that. And, we're learning how to negotiate whether male or female sex. How are we relating to that? All these programs and, whatever is there in the cultural field. And yeah, I believe children need support in that process rather than to, yeah, impose onto them a lot of the time, because I think of late, a lot of these kids wouldn't have even known that that option was there, wouldn't even be thinking in that direction if they weren't, yeah, I'm going to say brainwashed into the ideologies, rather than being supported and, yeah, properly held to have the natural experience in terms of their own questioning and their own, psychological maturation in a dysfunctional culture that they are surrounded by. And, that needs to be named, right?
That's right. When you say that, I really feel that when you say the dysfunctional culture, or a culture that has a rupture, right? These are the symptoms. This is what happens when the culture has something toxic or dysfunctional going on. We start getting confused about how we relate to these bodies and what the purpose of this body is. And we start dominating the body. We want to change the body. There's so much that comes into my mind and my heart, when we start speaking about this. And when I think about myself in seventh grade, if someone said to me, you can be a girl, because I already had some female biology, so I was already feeling like one, and I was very confused why I also had a penis. Like it didn't make sense to me. But if someone said you could transition, you can go on hormone blockers, you won't develop as a boy, you can develop as a girl, you can be a girl, I would have instantly taken that route because I was so dysphoric about my maleness. Now,
Mm,
what's interesting though about all this is I believe a lot of this dysphoria and even this industry is driven by a lot of unconscious misogyny. Because when you hate not just the female, but when you hate the feminine, when you don't see value in the feminine, men get dysphoric about their feminine nature and women get dysphoric about it. And I
yes.
think, right, I think a lot of the dysphoria is fueled by not knowing how to be a feminine person in either sex. And so when we think of like part of society's issue, when society doesn't allow your gender to be very fluid, not your sex, but your gender, meaning the role you play in society, when that has a specific kind of when that is pigeonholed and there's parameters around that, people start to feel dysphoric because of that, which is what I hear you getting to in your questions, right? Like,
Yes,
is this
yes.
an internalization?
Yes, and this is a very constant theme all throughout the episodes of this podcast in exploring the difference of masculinity and misogyny. And, the remedy really being that masculinity gets to be and is a spectrum. It doesn't have to be this rigid alpha male. And then
Yep.
if they don't fit into that, then, they're undesirable and then they are incels, or whatever the pathway is for someone. It's like women that are evolving um, like and prefer and desire men that can match that, and a lot of this patriarchal rhetoric that's going on in the world right now is trying to pull women back down so that men can feel, some men can feel more powerful, rather than lifting themselves up and everyone lifting each other up, which is a big message of this whole project here.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what's so important with that is there's this latent, or yeah, I think latent and unconscious homophobia that's part of transitioning that I think is really important to discuss. And I'll
Sure.
give you a perfect example, right? I saw this in two places. I mean, I see this in many places, but two personal examples that come to mind. One was a school that I was working with, an elementary school that was teaching gender theory. And I was coming in to kind of give them other insight, like you and I are talking about, through a somatic lens.
Oh, wow.
And what I was learning from this school is, again, they were teaching about gender being essentially biological sex. So there's really no biological sex. You choose your gender, and they were conflating the words. Um, but what they were doing was these boys that had effeminate tendencies, there was like an assumption or suggestion that maybe you're trans. And these girls that had masculine tendencies, there was maybe you're trans. Now, when I was growing up, the friends, and I'm a bisexual man, like I've been with men, I've been with women. When I was growing up, one of my long-term closet boyfriends was highly effeminate, highly effeminate. He would have fit the criteria for transitioning today because he doesn't fit in the category of male. Now, as a gay man, he fits in a certain category as like a feminine gay man. But as a kid, the way he expressed into dolls, like dressing up, putting on makeup, this man was never a woman, never wanted to be. He was just highly
Mm,
feminine.
mm,
So when you take someone's gender, which again, that's the energy that expresses, so he had a very feminine, not female, but feminine gender expression, and you say, you know what, you might want to consider transitioning. You might be trans because you act more like a girl. That has a interesting homophobic undertone if you really consider it, because you're
yes.
actually now taking kids that might become gay, might not as well, but might actually be gay and be like butch lesbians, which I work actually a lot with. Somehow they all find me when they're thinking they should transition to male, they reach out to me and they realize like I'm just a butch lesbian that has nowhere to go. And you're
Mm,
actually putting them into more of a binary in via having them transition than you are being more fluid, letting them just be an effeminate male that doesn't make sense to the patriarchy, for example. And also saw this happen with a man I've known for 18 years. Beautiful, thin, gorgeous, very feminine gay man in the city. And I know him from a restaurant, and I've spoken to him for years. And just last year, he started transitioning to female, which I was really surprised. I didn't see this coming. And
mm.
I heard him talking to his coworker, and the coworker said, "What did your mom think?" And he responded, "She said you finally make sense to me." And that, to me, that's the case study right there. It's
Oh,
like we don't know how to be with ambiguity as a society, which I understand being intersex. We try to put someone in a really specific box, but sometimes ambiguity needs more tending rather than what we're calling fluidity of making someone or telling someone to be trans. That's actually much more binary than letting someone not fit into a certain gender role, if
yes.
that
Yeah,
makes sense.
it totally makes sense. And that's a really interesting point, the inherent homophobia. And I was also just thinking, instead of the coercion of everyone being forced, having something forced down their throat, you have to believe this, you have to see this, you have to say it like this. What if instead we massaged, instead of the coercion, we massaged the wider perception to be open to the spectrum that is
Mm,
within each gender. You
beautiful. That's exactly it. That's where it is for me. That's why I like Patti Smith's one of my favorite musicians and artists. Patti Smith is a perfect example of a gender non-conforming woman. She is doing all
know?
these different things throughout her whole life that are super female and at times seem super male or super feminine, other times super masculine. And she just moves through them with this grace from a beautiful female body, right? She's a
Yes.
mother, she's a grandmother, she's an art. All these mother, maid, and crone, like she integrates all of it. That's a great example for people to see what when we say gender nonconforming or gender fluid, that's what it looks like. It has nothing to do with biological sex.
Mm, mm, mm. And when it's so authentic, so congruent like that, and maybe well, she's not a lesbian from what you're saying, but it's very attractive,
It is.
just the naturalness of the diverse polarity and the ownership of it is attractive, right?
That's right. And this is like, one thing that's it is so attractive actually. And one thing that's interesting if, as we're playing with this piece, one thing that's also changed with, again, old transsexuals that I know compared to new transgender individuals, right? There's a difference in thinking
Mm,
where there's an assumption that if you identify as the thing, you now are entitled to inclusion to those sex spaces and those sex experiences. And the transsexuals I know have a very, very golden rule, which is a beautiful one. They emulate that sex, so they bow to that sex. And that's a very different thing from being entitled to that sex space versus I bow to you because I emulate you. You tell me what you're comfortable with. That's a
Mm.
big difference in the generations.
Absolutely. And I have felt that difference as a woman.
Tell me about it. Like, what have you noticed?
The difference of respect and curiosity, which was happening more predominantly before, like you've just said, to feeling like they're penetrating in to a sacred container for the purpose of wanting to feel validated externally, as opposed to being there for what's actually being offered. And
Mm.
because that experience isn't directly relevant to them. Because the
Hmm.
thing is, I've actually had one time I allowed a trans woman to come into a Tigress event in person. And it was a very small circle, and I did it as an experiment, and I already had my instincts of how it would go. But I feel like this was really a long time ago as well, but I knew I needed to have the experience.
And,
And I,
tell me what this event is. I'm sorry. Like, what
okay, yes,
happens here?
yes, thank you. So it's a Tigress, the Tigress path, Tigress yoga is a very, very female orientated uh, movement alchemy. So a female yoga tantric practice. And it's about the lived experience of being a woman. It's about female anatomy, female physiology, the female psyche, and working with coming into harmony and deeper acceptance and embodiment of our own nature.
Mm.
And so I had two transgender clients, one-on-one clients at the time, and one of them kept asking me and asking me and asking me. And I kind of knew that it might not go very well. But I said yes. And I said, look, I'm going to have to say this is an experiment because it's not just about me or what I think. It's also about how the women feel because the
Hmm.
priority is the safety and privacy of women because that's what this is actually about. This is what it's actually for. And so, yes, that this person came and it all played out just the way that I thought that it might, while I still had curiosity and was just observing and witnessing the dynamics at the same time. And after that experience, each of the women, and I asked them, tell me how it felt for you, every single one of them, and they weren't many because it was very small, said, I will not come here again if it's not a female only space because they were uncomfortable, because there
Hmm.
was a palpable male gender polarity in the circle, in the women's sacred circle. And it
Yeah.
was very obvious. And it's not
See,
just,
I'm sorry.
sorry, it's not just because they actually still looked very masculine, typical male. It wasn't just that, it was the energy. Because when we're going into this embodiment practice, as you would know as a somatic therapist, we go so much underneath the layers of cognitive thought into the primordial felt sense realm where preferences, any ideology from the mind is irrelevant in that
Yes.
primordial realm.
I just
Yeah.
love that you just said that last piece because that's why I have a hard time subscribing to 90% of any ideology in the world, any
Mm.
political ideology, cultural ideology, because it's ideology. I am
Yeah. Yeah.
such a right, I'm devoted to the body. I'm devoted to nature. I'm devoted to the felt sense, the instinct, the unseen, that thing you just kind of know in your bones. That's way more valuable to me than something I'm being told I should feel or something I should be seeing. And
Mm.
that experience is such a beautiful one, the one you went. I mean, as stressful as it was, it's such a beautiful example because, again, this is where I see the neo-patriarchy bleeding in to these experiences. The feminine part of I think the beauty of a female body and why it's so easy to oppress female bodies is because the unseen is the value. Like when I think of, I don't know if you ever heard of Camille Paglia. She's a very interesting, very controversial gender theorist and thinker and feminist from 70s, 80s. And in her book, Sexual Persona, which I think came out in the 80s, it's a huge book. She talks about how when women are developing with puberty, they are, whether they like it or not, developing their felt senses because their development is way more hidden. Whereas male development is very seen. Like you see your penis, you see your testicles, you see your erections, you see these things. You orgasm in a way that ejaculates. All is external. Whereas the
Yes.
female sexual development is so internal. So you're feeling, you're developing felt sense when you're in a room of women, this thing that I can't understand because I don't have a full female experience. It's like I always think of it your bodies as tuning forks. You know, I think all human bodies are like that, but the female body is so connected to the unseen, so connected to the felt instinct that just like you said, when there is a male body in the room, no matter how much work they've done externally on it, there is a nature in that male body. There is a yang. There is something that pushes out. And this doesn't make them a bad person. It doesn't mean they shouldn't be able to wear women's clothing. It just means if you're in a space where you're prioritizing female bodies, your body is going to interrupt that. And if
Yes.
you think that your body is more important than their bodies, that is misogynistic and patriarchal just by definition.
100% I want to say more about that sensory awakening journey as a girl into a woman as well. But just before I do, this particular individual who I held a number of times, very unconditional, open, loving, one-on-one private space for. That got invited that one time when I had to let them know that it couldn't continue. And I said it in the kindest way that I possibly could, but I was still available to support them one-on-one. That individual sent me death threats by email
Mm,
for many, many, many months
mm.
afterwards and felt perfectly justified in doing so.
Which is a very male violent expression.
That's
And
right.
this is why there's an issue here, right? Because you look like a female because you identify as a female. If you're still acting in male aggressive patterns, I don't even believe you've integrated the feminine in your transition yet. And that's part of, to me, it's a privilege actually to cross into the other sex category. On both sides, it's a privilege because sex categories are sacred, they're historical, they are very important, I think, to maintain. And if you are passing as the, because some people will get to the point where they pass, you can sit next to someone and really feel like, oh, there is a woman here. It is rare, but that can happen. I believe it. I've met some. It's amazing because they've
Mm,
so integrated the feminine. They've so bowed to the female experience. They don't
mm,
have that male privilege they were conditioned with anymore. They've really kind of let it die in this way. But when
yes.
someone transitions, especially when it's a late life transition, or it's been 2 years and they're 40 years old and they've been a man for 38 years, that is going to take way more time to integrate than just a few years or a few dresses or a few shots of estrogen. It's a longer uh, journey that requires a lot of humility and a lot of security. And when you get death threats, when you get called a TERF, when you get called transphobic, that's coming from a person who's very fragile in their self state. And that's what I believe, like psychologically and spiritually, because a transsexual woman who has the humility of knowing I don't fully pass, I've been male longer than I've been female, I don't belong in these spaces, and a woman says, sorry, you can't be here, there's a humility there. You're not angry, you're not calling her names. You realize, I understand, I get it, because your self state is secure, and there's a reality with that, right? But if your self state isn't secure, now you're looking to women to validate your womanhood. And
Yeah.
again, this is just like what men do to women all the time when we're talking about these patterns of misogyny and patriarchy, putting it on them to secure the man in himself, and if you don't, lashing out with violence. So that's an important piece for me.
Thank you, because it's so important to so many women, one in two women at this point who have experienced male violence as a child or as a grown woman. And there are so many, and I'm one
Mhm,
of them. So
mhm.
that's a really damaging thing for me or anyone in a position like me to have to go through. And you just reminded me of a different experience I had many, many years ago with a dear gay friend of mine who, is very feminine by nature, appeared masculine in some ways, but his nature was, uh, you know, a healer and, the receptive, more yin partner in his relationship. And anyway, he requested with a lot of respect and reverence and openness to hearing a no to attend one of the more advanced women's spaces. So this was women who were very practiced, and it wasn't a public event like this other one was. Um, and we allowed him to come into the women's ritual space. And he was there with the view to learning from me and from the environment so he could replicate that and bring it to his gay men community, to the fairies, which I was
Hmm.
in support of, right?
Yeah.
Um, but he was just in tears. His heart was blown wide open, and he had no intention to remain with us in a space where he knew it was important for us to have that space because it wasn't exactly the same process. And as a
Yes.
very naturally feminine man, yeah, he just knew instinctively that is not his place to continue with us. But to have that exchange, to have that experience was something that was really beautiful for all of us that were there.
Mm. That's a perfect example of someone that's secure in their self state. They're not looking for you to secure them or validate them. They're understanding and bowing to your experience, meeting it where they can, and then when they're limited, moving on with love. And
Mm.
goes for anybody. The issue I have is no human being, in my opinion, is entitled to someone else's space. No one. I don't care what the sex is, what the religion, no one is. So to make an exception for a certain demographic of people is not good for them. It's not good for society. There should never be an exception to have to force inclusion somewhere. You should always have your boundary and your discernment, especially women who haven't had that. It's only been recent. I mean, talking a couple decades, women gained legal right to their spaces. I mean, it's hasn't been that long of an experiment, has it? Like to leave a patriarchal system.
Yes, yes. And where it stands currently in Australia is not just that trans women can enter a women or even girl space. Men, biological men that look and identify as men are also permitted because of the unwillingness to define sex and gender as separate things. In
Wow, that is wild. I didn't know that. That is wild. That's incredible. Yeah, and you're right, because of the unwillingness. Again, because we've conflated gender with sex. Because it is very easy to say what a woman and a man is when you understand sex. It takes 2 seconds. When you're going into gender, it's like it could be anything because gender's fashion, it's art, it's feminine, masculine, it's the unseen, it's the seen. It can you can give it any name you want to, right? That's why people say there's thousands of genders because there's endless ways to express yourself. It's energy is gender. But sex is material. It's the body. It's the earth itself. To me, it's like saying you can't say what a tree is. If you did that, you could just decimate the entire rainforest because who cares? You have to have some sense of material reality.
That's right. That's right. And it goes even further recently. I think this might be New Zealand as well, but it's certainly Australia. The birth certificate. So for the benefit of the child to have this record of who their biological parents are, this can now also be altered based on the preferences of the adults to play with gender.
Wow. How do women feel about this? Like, what's happening in Australia? Are women okay that men are permitted into their spaces? Like, what's going on? I'm
Absolutely,
curious.
absolutely not. I mean, there are activists that will, in my opinion, are not that embodied and intimately relating with that primordial underneath the level of cognitive mind relationship with themselves. And so, and maybe they are and they have mixed spaces, but they also have women's spaces, or they just think it doesn't matter anymore. They think the inclusiveness trumps everything.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, but and they are a little bit more, I don't know, a bit more of a minority because with Sal Grover's case in the media, it seems like predominantly because of her case, in fact, I've noticed people feel more safe to say that they agree with her And it's the
Mm.
first time in years that I've seen the public support of a woman clearly defining sex from gender. And so it seems like the predominant population are in support of her, but the politics, the prime minister, the legal system are not in alignment still, because that got changed back in 2011, I believe.
Wow. That's incredible. I mean, what's so interesting is liberation, liberalism, feminism masquerading, or patriarchy masquerading as those things. I've been so interested in seeing that. Like, I especially see this play out a lot in the kink community, where
Mhm.
a lot of women have adopted male aggressive sexual patterns in their heterosexual, quote, consensual kink relationships. And I don't believe for a second these women are enjoying any of it. I think what they're enjoying is the security they get knowing they're going to be really wanted because they have no boundaries sexually and they're calling it kink. And I've
Yes.
I've worked with a lot of these women, and I've been fascinated to see the level of sexual violation that lives in them, from consensually going to a sex party with their husband, for example. You know, they're cognitively consenting. Their body is screaming no. And when they
Mm.
drop into their somatic experience, they feel all those violations, all those no's. But that's just one other symptom of this piece you're talking about of losing all boundaries and sense of discernment, right?
That's right. And it really genuinely is such a process for women to differentiate what is the voice of their body as opposed to the voice of their mind or of their conditioning. And it's a very ego annihilating, discombobulating process for women. I've witnessed it for decades as a teacher and somatic guide, right? And it takes a lot of safety and a very particular environment to really forge that relationship with honest self-sense as a female animal. And
Hmm.
to reclaim autonomy of that is something that completely changes her reality in terms of really embodying her own inner authority and all of the beautiful things that come from that. And this greatly contrasts a woman a number of years ago at the time when I was getting pretty heavily cancelled around Australia after being a fairly prominent teacher. Um, I was going to buy the rights to her music. So this was nothing to do with, like my usual circle or the discussions around this. I thought I was just conversing with a music artist over email and appreciated some of her work. And yeah, I was going to use it in my marketing. And she was so happy. And then she said yes. And then she got back to me and said, actually, no, I've heard that you're anti-trans, and so I can't be associated with you. And she tried to school me on how what I was doing was wrong, and it was my job to educate the women in the space from the conceptual lens when I'm there to hold space
Hmm.
for deep
Hmm.
somatic work, that they should be inclusive and I should be driving everything in that direction. When what I'm actually doing is removing all of the voices of the world, in a sense, to support a woman to feel directly from the earth, from her own felt sense, from her heart in her womb in connection.
Hmm.
And that's a whole journey in itself. That's a sacred somatic adventure that takes courage to face and to feel, because it might be contrasting some of her own concepts. And she has to surrender some of that to let the full power of her body awaken. And
Hmm.
that's the embodiment journey for women. That's a foundational part of it.
I just wrote the other day, somatics helps you listen to the nature inside of you, not the man inside of you. And I was writing that to women around this topic. And it's
Wow.
exactly what you just said. It's like when you grow up in a male dominant world, the voice in your head is a male dominant voice. You know, this is for men and women. So we have this idea given to us from a male dominant society. Even if you're not in the society your grandparents were in, it's so internalized through your family culture and through conditioning. So that voice that says certain things, get curious. Is that voice a patriarchal, reverberation of the past that's still living in our bodies and we're keeping alive now? it's becoming law in your country. Because I'll say things to my friends here like, well, on paper, we're not patriarchal anymore, but individually, some people can be. But you literally, on paper, that is a patriarchal law that a man can walk into a woman's space. I mean, that just blows my mind. So
Yes.
I think what you're doing is so important, this piece of literally letting the ego and the concepts and the constructs die and dissolve, which takes a lot of humility to say I was wrong. I've been through that myself recently. But to really feel in the body, my body's saying no, I have to learn how to feel this. Or it's saying yes, I have to learn how to feel this. Like that felt senses. It's a wisdom that is beyond human beings. It's so old and powerful. And
Yes.
I,
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you because we went to something else. You were going to talk about that developing sense in puberty, and I feel like this is part of it. So I'd love to hear how that was for you or what you want to add to that.
Yeah, thank you. It is really connected. And going back to that experience of that circle, those women that came and said to me after that didn't feel right, I wouldn't come again if it were like this. They were saying that with no malice to that individual that came. It was, they were saying it like, I don't mean to offend anyone, but my body said no.
Yes.
Right? Because what is happening in a women's only field is that we're able to adjust this internal, yeah, inner attention and the communication with our inner body purely through senses that gets corrupted constantly as a girl,
Mm,
as a young woman. And so those awakening senses that you mentioned as well, it's like constantly being penetrated into by a patriarchal culture, by misogynistic attitudes in individuals. There's a constant experience as a young woman of feeling infiltrated, penetrated into because we're so highly receptive and our sensory system is so, and our body's physiology are very internalized, like you were saying.
hmm
Our,
hmm
our physiology mirrors the energy, which is the guide to be following here, in my,
Yeah.
this primal divine reality that we are not meant, in my opinion, to override to accommodate different frames of mind. It's more like, what do we need to go through to stay in touch, stay close with, stay intimate with yeah, primordial nature and the wisdom and intelligence of that, and what do we have to learn from that? So the experience, the internal felt experience as a girl, a young woman growing into a woman, and even for grown women to reclaim this is huge too, because of that feeling of being encroached upon. And
Mm,
so the experience of being able to fully flower open without fear,
mm,
most women have never experienced that. And there's something about a female only space that creates so much felt sense safety for each woman's energetic system, like the relaxation through her physiology to actually expand and take up her full space.
yeah.
And over time, that confidence, that inner authority can grow to bring that wherever she is for the most part. But whenever there is an energy system in the circle, in the room, that is in contrast to that flowering field, opening and expanding and awakening, even if everyone was blindfolded, it could be felt.
hmm That's where it is.
The
That's so
polarity,
important. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
yeah, I was just saying polarity is so real like that. It's not because she's decided it, it just is. It's the isness.
See that right there? Not that she's decided it. That's what's so important. That's why it pains me to see women's intuition being labeled as transphobic. Because when you said blindfolded, we would know, that's the key right there. It's not because this person is transsexual. It's because you feel, I mean, of course it involves that, but it's not based on them being transsexual. It's based on the feeling. If they were transsexual and the feeling was different, no one in the room would care. Their body would flower. But the body says, there's something here that's not letting me flower because the animal body knows if I open up and dissolve my boundaries and there's a penetrating force in the room, that could be dangerous. And it doesn't even mean that person's dangerous. It's just an instinct that the animal body has, right? With these masculine, feminine energies. And I've had one of my good friends who's was a butch lesbian who actually transitioned to male and is now in this detransition phase 10 years after doing it. She is trying to figure themselves out right now and making a lot of sense of this and teaching me a lot of these things. But they've told me many times that when they were in these butch lesbian spaces, there was a sense of safety that they can't even name that's been obliterated because even lesbian spaces have been told they need to be inclusive of men who identify as women. So they're losing that incredibly important feminine softness, something biological men really don't require. Like, we don't require to be in a male-only space to get into that solidity that lives in us or to invoke the masculinity. It helps to be only with men because there's things you can say that would be offensive to women that you wouldn't want to say. But the felt sense is different for men than it is for women. So I just think this is all so important to honor the female experience. Like, can't we honor the female experience and the transsexual experience? Can we honor them both without making them include each other in everything? Because you shouldn't be included in every transsexual experience. Wouldn't make sense.
No, I wouldn't even attempt to make that. Yeah, and why can't the impulse to have external validation itself be questioned? Like, what's going on there that
Yes.
we need it so much?
Yes, that's the key. Because that was what I was haunted by after top surgery. I was like, who did I do this for was my question, right? And part of it was for me. I became disgusted by my own body. You know, I internalized the shame and the disgust that was aimed at me, like we do. But I wanted to make sense to society. I didn't want to always have to explain, why are you a man with breasts? Oh, I didn't know you had breast. You know, I didn't want to have to constantly go into this trying to make sense of myself. So it was a relief just to know I'll take my shirt off and no one will even notice anything. It was such a relief. But it might have been more for them than it was for me when I really feel the reality of it. So, but that's something I have to own. You know, I'm not going to hold that against people or even society. That's still something I did. And
Mm.
so I think there's again a humility and a amazing potential of healing and power to say I'm really insecure in my nature. You know, if you're a transsexual woman, so you're born male and you're transitioning to female and you're really insecure in being female, you should be. You've never been female before. You should be insecure. It should be strange. It should be like, what do I do next? I'm gonna fuck up a lot. Like, that's okay. Have humility. More people will love you and support you with humility than with a sense of arrogance and entitlement. So that's why I'm saying we could support each other so beautifully if we don't have this entitlement piece to each other's spaces.
Oh my gosh, yes. And when you just spoke from that vulnerability, from owning that insecurity, what happened in my system is my heart just kind of rushed
Yes.
towards you.
Yes. Yes, it feels so good. It feels it's so good. And you know, I have such a reverence for transsexuals because of we have such parallel experiences. I know what it's like to have sex dysphoria. I know what it's like to have gender affirming sex treatment. Like, I know these things intimately, so I get it on such a primal level that again can't be understood unless you really, really experience it. And transsexual men, especially, so female to male, have helped me so much in understanding my own body and my masculinity and this whole strange path. Like, they've been dear allies for me.
Wow.
And all the ones I know who have been beautiful allies, they would never assume the right to anyone's space. And so they also taught me a lot about humility. And that's what I've come to expect for myself now, right? Because of what they've taught me.
That's so wonderful. And I'm really happy that you can name so clear the patriarchal entitlement that is within the trans woman impulse to insert themselves into female spaces. And this just needs to be said. And I want to kind of feel a little deeper underneath that, actually, because the alternative of owning the vulnerability and the insecurity, or however it may be language for them, Is it the love that they want? Is it the feeling of being embraced that they're trying to get from the female space?
Mm. That's what I've learned from speaking to a bunch of them. They're not a monolith, so I can't speak for every trans woman. But the ones I've spoken to that are really humble and really honest and have like dissolved their ego, I've heard from them that they are just dying. Like, what's so hard about being transsexual is deep down, you're not that sex. You might not consciously talk about it, but it is a lifetime of being at war with your nature, a lifetime of surgeries and hormones every week and constantly unlearning the way you were as a man for 30 years. I mean, it's a lifetime of fighting your nature. It's a tough road to walk. It takes some serious courage and guts and humility to walk that road. And the ones that really understand that road and what it means, they're looking to women to teach them how to be women. It's like they're being raised all over again. It's like a second puberty. And there's a difference between the ones that are aware of that and say, you are my teacher, you are who I'm invoking and emulating, and the ones that say, you better accept me. The ones that say, you better accept me, they have not integrated their female or their feminine yet. They are men in women's clothing. As horrible as that sounds, their actions tell me that. Whereas the
Mm.
ones who don't come to that in that way, I see, wow, you're actually integrating your feminine. You're not leading with your male privilege you're used to having. You're really taking a step back and being curious and questioning your ego and letting women teach you. It's two different kinds of people. And this is where it goes beyond transsexual. This is just human. Because we see this in all different groups of people, don't we? Like the people that have humility and curiosity and gratitude, and the people that have entitlement and dominance. But the lens we're talking about is this interesting one of if you're male and you are conditioned and you grow male and you have went through male puberty and you have a penis, decades of transitioning doesn't take that out of you. That's still part of your experience. If you're not in relationship with that, it's going to come out in all these unconscious ways onto women.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, the years of socialization as a certain gender go very deep.
Very.
Um, yeah, I kind of want to come to a conclusion here, or as we come to a completion, just want to really name the impulse to want to be in the women's space, perhaps unconsciously as a refuge from the wider patriarchal culture. And why do
Mm,
women need to absorb that? And why can't we name the freaking elephant in the room of patriarchy and actually address how everyone's reacting to their relationship with that, and how can attention turn onto that instead of against each other?
mm. I just feel that's so deep in my heart because I know from being intersex and being a very feminine man, especially growing up, I've integrated my masculine a lot the last decade, but being a very feminine man historically, men were not safe, right? I did not want to be in spaces with men. They had
Mm.
to either be very gay or I had to be in spaces with women. And so when you just said what you said about seeking refuge, I think that's a very important thing to understand. Because if you're a transsexual woman, men are terrifying to be around. The way, because you will start having the dagger of misogyny aimed at you, even though you're biological male. The way you're touched, the way you're objectified, the way you're treated, you'll find refuge with other women in a way you can't with men. And so even naming that is such like I get chills how beautiful it would be if that was the ask. If that can be made conscious, like I as a transsexual woman, let's say, I want to be in a space with women to feel safe as I come into this part of me. What women want to help me do that? Totally different intention, right? Versus coming into a female space where the female biology and what you're developing is the priority, not their transition.
100%. Yeah. And I know so many women, like almost every woman I know has that capacity to want to support when someone's coming from a very genuine and vulnerable place. They're not opposed to that. They're not closed to that because it's real, it's honest. And
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, that's what it is. Yeah, I'm very grateful for you. It's amazing how this conversation and you just came out of left field. I don't even know how you, yeah, I mean, I know you said someone referred you to speak to me, but I'm really grateful because I've spoken about these things and not many people want to speak about it publicly, but you already
Mm.
survived the cancellation. You're at that beautiful place of, I can handle this, which I really, really respect. Like that
Yes.
integrity, I really respect that.
Thank you so much. And I want to name Sal Grover in this moment because it was her speaking out and all the public support she's currently getting that was part of me feeling safe to bring this out again. Because while I've continued to just presence it from time to time in closed women's spaces, I just came to not mention it at all publicly in recent years because of the backlash. And yeah, and your voice as an intersex person and your lived experience is just the most tremendous offering into this conversation. So thank you so much for bringing your two-spirit intelligence and beautiful loving awareness and your own anchoredness into your own somatic embodied reality and speaking from that place. So yeah, I'm so grateful that you could come and talk on this with me today. Thank you so much.
Me too. I'm so honored. Thanks for everything you taught me today too.
Thank you for sharing this episode if it's moved you, and know that saving or sharing it around, it genuinely helps to spread this message and also to attract more interesting speakers to join the Beyond Patriarchal Sex conversations. And there is much more to come, so keep tuning into these weekly episodes so that we can all be part of shifting division into connection for ourselves and for the coming generations.